You think you're just spending time alone, but something already changed. Not your life, your brain. Right now, it's quietly rewriting how you see reality. And you won't notice it happening because the more it changes, the more normal it feels. Reality distortion. When you stay alone for too long, the problem doesn't start in the outside world. It starts in how you perceive it. The brain does not create reality on its own. It constantly calibrates itself through signals from other people, a glance, a tone of voice, a subtle reaction. These are your brain's reality check system. When that system disappears, the brain begins to predict, and those predictions slowly drift away from accuracy. Silence starts to feel heavier than it should. Time either stretches or slips away too quickly. Even familiar places begin to feel slightly unfamiliar because your brain no longer has a reference point. The prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for interpretation and judgment, starts generating more assumptions without social feedback, and those assumptions are often wrong. This is why the longer isolation continues, the colder and more distant the world begins to feel. Reality itself doesn't change, but the way your brain processes it does. And at some point, without realizing it, you begin to live inside a version of reality your own mind created. Threat sensitivity. Loneliness doesn't just bring silence, it creates a brain on high alert. The human brain is built to function in a social environment. Historically, being alone meant being exposed to danger, so the brain automatically treats isolation as a risk. In this state, the amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, becomes more active. Small sounds feel amplified. Meaningless details start to feel important. A door creak, a shadow, a slight vibration. These are no longer just events. They become potential threats. The brain keeps scanning, constantly asking, is something there? And most of the time, it finds something or creates it. This is why the longer you stay alone, the less calm you feel, because your brain cannot prove that you are safe. And when there is no proof, it behaves as if danger is already there. Social withdrawal loop. Loneliness often begins as a choice, but if it lasts long enough, it becomes a habit. At first, you just choose not to go out, then not to talk, then not to engage at all. The brain adapts quickly. As social interaction decreases, social skills begin to weaken. Talking feels harder. Being around people starts to feel exhausting. At this point, the brain takes a shortcut, avoidance, because avoidance brings short-term relief, but that relief is a trap. Every time you avoid, the next social situation feels even more difficult, and that leads to more avoidance. This is where the loop closes. The brain no longer sees social interaction as a reward. It starts coding it as a source of stress. And over time, you don't choose to be alone anymore. It just feels like you have no other option. Dopamine drop. Motivation doesn't disappear all at once. It fades slowly. The brain depends on a reward system, and social interaction is one of its strongest inputs. A conversation, a smile, the simple feeling of being understood. These increase dopamine. When isolation lasts, that source is removed, and dopamine levels begin to drop. This changes everything. Nothing feels as meaningful as it used to. Even the things you once enjoyed start to feel flat. Starting becomes difficult. Continuing becomes even harder. The brain shifts into energy conservation mode because without reward, effort feels pointless. This is why you begin to think you're lazy, but you're not. You're operating on a low dopamine system, and that system doesn't push you to move forward. It keeps you exactly where you are. Overthinking amplification. The brain does not tolerate emptiness, and loneliness creates a lot of it. When external stimulation decreases, the brain starts generating its own content. Thoughts increase, but control decreases. The same topic gets analyzed again and again. The same memory replays over and over. The same possibilities get rebuilt from different angles. During this process, a network called the default mode network becomes highly active. It's responsible for internal thinking and self-reflection. But when it's overactive, thinking stops leading to solutions. It turns into a loop. You feel like you're processing something, but you're not moving forward. You're circling the same thought in different forms. There is no new input, but the analysis continues. And over time, these thoughts begin to feel like reality because the brain believes what it hears most. And when you're alone, the only voice it hears is your own. Emotional blunting. The brain cannot stay in a state of intense emotion forever. At some point, it protects itself. Loneliness can amplify feelings at first, more thinking, more sensitivity. But this isn't sustainable. When the brain becomes overloaded, it reduces emotional responses to restore balance. This is called emotional blunting. You don't feel deeply sad anymore, but you don't feel truly happy either. Everything becomes flatter, more distant, less vivid. This happens as activity in the limbic system decreases. The parts of the brain responsible for processing emotions begin to slow down. This isn't a malfunction, it's a defense mechanism. But over time, it creates a different problem. You start to feel empty. Life continues, but something feels missing. And the most dangerous part is this: it starts to feel normal. Imaginary presence. The brain expects social connection. It's the default setting. When you stay alone for too long, that expectation isn't fulfilled, but it doesn't disappear either. So the brain tries to fill the gap. Sometimes this shows up as a feeling that someone is there, as if you're being watched, as if there's another presence in the room. It often feels unsettling. But the mechanism is simple. The brain starts predicting the social signals it's no longer receiving. Because the human brain is built to detect and process other people, and those systems never fully turn off. When there is no input, the brain generates assumptions. This isn't a hallucination, it's compensation. But as this continues, you begin to trust your own perception less, and loneliness stops being just physical. It becomes something happening inside your mind. Memory distortion. Your past starts to change, not the events themselves, the way you remember them. Memory isn't fixed. Each time you recall something, your brain reconstructs it, and isolation shifts that reconstruction. Negative memories become sharper, more detailed, more emotionally intense. Positive moments begin to fade. They lose color. They feel less real. Why? Because your brain is no longer focused on comfort. It's focused on potential threat. The amygdala becomes more active, prioritizing anything that once felt unsafe or painful. At the same time, the brain gives less weight to neutral or positive experiences. So it starts to rebalance your past, highlighting pain, adjusting tone, altering context. You're not lying to yourself. Your brain is filtering. But over time, this filtered version becomes your truth. You stop remembering your life as it was. You remember a version shaped by isolation, a version where things felt worse and mattered less. Self-perception. Shift. You don't define yourself in isolation. You define yourself through others. A glance, a reaction, a piece of feedback. These are the signals your brain uses to understand who you are. Loneliness removes that mirror, and the brain fills the gap, but it rarely fills it with something neutral. I'm not good enough. No one cares about me. I'm invisible. These thoughts begin as guesses, but over time, they stabilize because there's nothing to challenge them. The prefrontal cortex tries to analyze these beliefs, but without external feedback, it has nothing to correct them with. So the brain accepts them as truth. You don't just think these things, you start to believe them. This is why loneliness isn't just a disconnection from others, it becomes a disconnection from yourself. Brain plasticity change. The brain is not fixed, it reshapes itself based on how you live. This is called neuroplasticity. When loneliness lasts long enough, this process begins to adapt to it. Neural pathways related to social interaction start to weaken. Not because they're broken, but because they're not being used. At the same time, pathways linked to internal thinking grow stronger because they're constantly active. The brain optimizes what it uses most. So, over time, your system becomes better at being alone and worse at reconnecting. This is why returning to social environments starts to feel uncomfortable, not just mentally, but physically, because your brain has rewired itself. Neurons reorganize, connections shift. What once felt unnatural begins to feel normal. And that's the critical point. Loneliness stops being a temporary state, it becomes your brain's default setting.